You've got it. You better stop it. Ooh. You've got it. You've got it.
This episode of the Ready State podcast is brought to you by Cock Punch Coffee, which is created by our friend Tim Ferriss, based on a fictional world he created as a creative outlet.
Yeah, it started with this sort of fictional writing, but quickly one of our friends was like, hey, you should have your own coffee. Tim loves coffee. Cock Punch Coffee was born. And what's amazing about this coffee, number one, low carbon footprint, like 0. Second is that all the profits from the coffee go to supporting disease research around sort of diseases that haven't had traditionally good therapeutic results.
Yeah, it goes all to his foundation, SciSay, and we love that it's like, we keep calling it like coffee with a cause. But what you forgot to say, what you forgot to say is that we've been brewing this stuff up in our espresso machine now for weeks, and it tastes so good and has a really unique depth of flavor, and we've been running it in our coffee machine and just loving it.
When I was fortunate enough to have the first batches when they first came out, and I was like, oh boy, this is like when your friend is like, I'm going to play you a song I wrote. You're like, oh, here we go. can't wait. And this coffee is so good. Look, people, Kelly is a little bit of a coffee snob. I'm going to talk about myself as the third person. We are very snobby about our coffee.
That is
and
true.
I have vacuumed out a lot of coffee out of our espresso machine. And Cock Punch is great coffee.
And you know what else? We have trained our daughter Caroline to be a coffee snob, and she also likes it. And I am really a believer that if you can get a teenager to like anything, it must actually be good.
Dude, if you want to learn more, go to cockpunchcoffee.com/TRS and use code TRS for 20% off your first excellent purchase.
We are excited to welcome Nolan Kim to the podcast. Nolan has a background as a transformational coach, a professional magician, and a member of the Magic Castle. He transitioned to the health and wellness space as a performance coach after a significant health event 7 years ago. He is a master breath coach with 6 certifications at the advanced level. After 5 years of working with elite athletes and executives, he and his wife, Dr. Amanda Kim, blended emotional health with executive coaching, physical health, and magic. Yes, magic, to create a journey of growth by integrating mind, body, and spirit to become fully present in your life and rediscover your power. He has 2 dogs, loves being active, working out, spending time with friends, and is passionate about people becoming the best versions of themselves.
Just so everyone knows, we have Nolan on. He's a great coach in this sort of space that we're obsessed with around lifestyle and emotional health. But he was the lucky winner of the fantasy Day with the Starettes when we had our Built to Move sweepstakes. He came up, and the reason he's on is not only is a great coach and has some real insights into how you have to take care of the other things besides just working out. His story about how he got here was enough for me. I was like, we have to have you on the podcast.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the first time ever we've had someone with that particular story, and we won't spoiler it in this intro, but it's definitely super interesting. And, I think that there's a lot to be learned here about mindset and how to think about things differently. And it's super cool that he's figured out a way to integrate his first profession, which is being a magician, into mindset and health coaching. And you're going to learn a lot about that in this episode.
Yeah, and little spoiler takeaway, when you're battling with your spouse, go ahead and just pause, hug each other,
do 5 breaths.
Take 5 breaths and see what happens. We tried it this morning. We weren't battling, but we tried it this morning, and it's real.
Yeah, it was real.
I see you, baby.
I see you.
Yeah, I think you're going to enjoy. Nolan is a delightful human, and I think it'll give you some context and insight into why we need to make sure that we're paying attention to behaviors that allow us to be better members of our community.
Nolan, welcome to the Ready State podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So I have to tee this up a little bit that in 2023, we did a contest for Built to Move, and we did a lot of giveaways and special prizes. And one of those was a trip to come to San Rafael and hang out with us and do a sauna and work out and
eat shabu shabu.
Eat shabu shabu prepared by Mags. And it turned out that you won that prize. And it in the end, we were the winners because, we got to spend some time with you and learn about your story and be presented with maybe the coolest magic show known to man that was so awesome and unexpected. We've continued to talk about it for almost the entire time since we met you. So I wanted to tee that up, that we have this connection from this very random event of you winning a Ready
That's right.
State Built to Move contest.
And while we were there, not only do we find that we were such kindred spirits across training and some of these health practices that we're all into, but also you shared a banana story with us, which we'll get into. And that really, I think, sets up this conversation beautifully about, and we'll get into that conversation. But it's one of the reasons I remember you telling me, and then we said, we've got to talk about this with our community.
Yeah, it was so fun last year. And I mean, honestly, I thought it was, I've never won anything like that. I thought it was
No one
prank.
has.
I
No one
didn't,
should.
I didn't even like respond to mags for like months, probably. I was like spam, you know. But
Yeah, well, we were really delighted because, inviting someone into our universe could really go either way, and the fact that it was you and we had so much in common was so cool. So before we get into talking about your health journey and what you're doing now professionally, I know you started your career as a magician, and not just any magician, like a legit magician. And I'd love you to tell our audience a little bit about that part of your background. But before you do, I have to emphasize again that when you came up here to visit with us, you did a really intimate magic show for a group of 8 or 9 of us right after dinner on our dining room table that to this day blows our mind. And I think the reason it blew my mind is that in normal magic shows, the person is away from you and you can think, oh, okay, they have a trick table. They have all these little strategies with the eyes that you can't see from where you are in an audience, but you were right next to me doing this bonkers magic stuff. And again, we've talked about it ever since. So, tell us how you got started in your life and a career in magic
And how that's led you to where you are.
Yeah.
yeah, so I started in undergrad. I've been doing magic for like 20 years, member at the Magic Castle in Hollywood.
Woo!
Yeah, you guys have to come sometime still. And I started actually making balloon animals. I don't know if you guys know that part of me. And then that evolved into magic. And I just did it at first just because I loved it. It's so fun. You make people happy. And, there's not many jobs in the world where people tell you you're doing a good job, like immediately right there on the spot. So I was like in love with it.
You fooled me. Congratulations.
And so that evolved, from being a hobbyist to learning and becoming a professional and doing close-up shows. I did like stage shows back in the day. Like that was like the big stuff, making people appear and disappear, sawing people in half. After I got married, those things take up a lot of space in the garage. We decided to get rid of those. And so I primarily do close-up magic or parlor magic, which is kind of in between stage and close-up, what you guys saw. So you see a little bit of both. And I've been doing that for the last 20 years. I think the way I use it in my work now is I think magic. Like if you think about the show that I did for you guys, there were moments like you just lost track of time. And like for even a split second, you forgot about your present anxieties or stress going on. You were just fully enjoying the moment, right? And so to me, that's just being present. And there's a lot of powerful magic, metaphorically speaking, that happens in that space.
Yeah, and we'll definitely get more. I want to learn more about how you're using it now. And before we move on from the subject, though, can you tell people a little bit about what the Magic Castle is? Because it's what I know is that you're not invited to be a magician at the Magic Castle unless you're extremely legit, and it's very exclusive. So, can you explain what that is for people who've
Yeah.
never heard of it?
Totally. It's a private magicians club in West Hollywood that is well known. It's on a lot of reality shows. Neil Patrick Harris used to be the president until recently, until he moved to New York. He's actually a wonderful magician. And but yeah, you have to invite only by a member magician. So I had to do a 10-minute magic audition in front of their board, and you get the thumbs up or the thumbs down, and then you pay your dues. So it's kind of like a magician's exclusive clubhouse, and we get to invite our guests there and entertain them. It's invite only, and it's coat and tie, so like you have to dress up, and it's super fun, super good food, drinks, and an evening of all sorts of magic.
Can't wait to go.
You end up, you're doing this thing. Currently, right now, you are sort of have created a space to teach people about breath, heat exposure, downregulation, health practice. It's one of the reasons we're kind of connected. How do you go from magic to there and start to weave that story for us about, because when you came up here, I think we went stand up paddling, we deadlifted, we you know what I mean, we got in the sauna, we got in the ice, we messed around, we kind of had the perfect day. How does a person sort of begin to transfer and become one of those coaches?
It was like an ideal day. It was pretty awesome. Um, yeah, that's a great question. I mean, my background, even before I got into magic, I was trying to become a professional hockey player. And so that was my journey, and came up a little shy of that, made it pretty far. And after that, it was just kind of, my health was, it was kind of a roller coaster. I was either all in or doing nothing,
I
and
think
really
you'll relate to
wrestling.
that.
Yeah, wrestling with my identity as who I was apart from being a competitive athlete. And then I found CrossFit, which I'd never done before, which was super fun because like I didn't grow up doing the Olympic moves, and they're just, I don't know, they're so fun, and dropping the weight overhead is just like feels so fun.
Right.
um,
And it's so fun when you're a serious athlete beforehand, because I think, I don't know whether you experienced this, but Kelly and I both, came from professional athletics into CrossFit and realized that we had no skills and we're terrible athletes, I think, or at least we had a lot of potential.
We had a
That's
lot of
another way
potential,
to put it.
and though it felt like we were on a team again and training in a group together.
Yeah. And there was
That was
just
the
so
first
much
time.
to learn. There was
Yeah.
so much to learn. So I don't know if you experienced that when you did
totally,
that.
The
totally.
current
It's
the
fun to work.
the gym wasn't doing it for us. Like we would go to Club One, but it didn't feel like being on a national team.
Totally. I mean, it's fun to work out with other people as well, just in a different vibe. And so that was fun. I did that for a long time. It's fun to get better at something, when you're like, oh, I suck at this. I love just especially when you first start something, like the steps are so big. You get a little improvement is like a big improvement, when you're at those early stages, which is so fun to see. And so anyway, I got into pretty good shape doing CrossFit, super involved with that, eating healthy. I was maybe in the best shape I'd been in since being a competitive athlete. And then in my early 30s, this is almost 7 years ago now, at the end of a CrossFit workout, I collapsed, and I had a cardiac arrest. My heart actually stopped. And so
Wait, your heart. So just so let's circle on the double click on that. Your heart stopped. Do you remember that happening, or do you remember collapsing?
no,
And
I
how?
don't even
And
remember
tell us
collapsing.
that.
Yeah. So it was like a workout, high heart rate, one of those sprints, I was pull-ups with like heavy kettlebell swings, and I finished the workout, pushed myself to the limit there. And then apparently
Clearly,
I was leaning to the rig. And, most people say it feels like you're going to die during CrossFit. And, that actually happened to me. So I guess I'm leaning against the rig. They had to explain this to me. I don't have any recollection of this. But I was leaning against the rig. And then apparently I collapsed to all fours. But my friend noticed like my wrists were kind of like curved in when I caught myself. She's like, that's not normal. And then she said, I uttered out, I need help. And then I just passed out.
And so I'm sure you don't remember, but what in learning after the fact, what was the response by the people that were with you at the gym? I mean, what I mean, I'm assuming they called 911 and did the normal course of action, but
Yeah,
what was that?
they called 911. I think I still had a heartbeat for a little bit, and then it stopped. And then my friend, and then there was actually another young man. He's in high school, and he was driving away already. I was like at the noon class, so like not that many people were there. He was driving away and kind of saw some commotion, so he turned around and came back, and he was the one that actually ended up doing compressions on me for CPR.
the
So
high school kid.
a high school kid, and I
Did
was,
did he take in like a CPR class or have training, or did he
I
just
think
like
so.
Ooh,
was
ooh,
Yeah.
I got this. Me, choose me.
I think he had, and then I saw him afterwards. I'm like, oh man, gosh, he's probably traumatized, but it just really solidified that he wanted to do some like work in the medical world and for the military, which was like, oh, I was like, that's so cool. What a neat
Well,
story.
he got into college because of you, because that's the best
Yeah.
essay you can possibly write.
yeah. Yeah, you're like, I saved a guy. So, okay, just a few more logistics. Did they have to put an AED on you? Did they have one?
They did not
What was
have
that
one
situation like?
at the gym at the time, and now like every gym around here, after hearing that story, bought one after that. But the paramedics got there really quick, like in 3 or 4 minutes. So they were doing CPR on me for like 3 minutes, I believe. The paramedics got there, and then they shocked me. My heart started right up because I was young. The problem was I didn't realize this was such a big deal in the moment, like until after I read all the medical stuff. But my heart started, but I didn't regain consciousness. And so, like, you see the defib thing in the movies, clear, boom. It's like, boom, they're awake. Their eyes are open like immediately. And that didn't happen for me. So they took me to a hospital. They decided to induce me in a coma and put me in something called the Arctic Sun procedure, which was basically putting me, running ice water around my body to put me in a hypothermic state. So they did that.
Oh, there it is.
Oh, yeah,
There's
tell
the
us more,
first,
yeah.
the
That's
root,
the
right?
There we go.
The
Okay,
first time you got real cold.
You're real cool.
So
Wait, so tell us more. I think Kelly's. I've actually heard of this procedure, but can you tell us a little more medically why they would do that to someone who had a cardiac arrest?
Yeah, it's my understanding of it is part of it was to preserve brain function because they were unsure of that for me, and vital organ function. But they're also thinking was they weren't sure what caused it, and so they were hoping it would cause kind of like hitting the reset button on your old Nintendo or something, your computer. Like you have these experts that are like, oh, have you tried turning it on and off? Similar, that were like they hoped that my brain would sort of reboot and bring things back online. And 3 days later, I did wake up and zero brain deficits and zero heart damage, which is
can we ask your wife about that? Honestly, let's be
Yeah.
yeah.
because I would. This would be the thing. I'm not trying to poke light. This is horrifying, but if Juliet would be like, "Hey, you didn't do X and such," I'd be like, "Bro,
Yeah. You're like, I died.
I lost that in the reset."
Yeah. You're like, I died. I died.
We have this running joke of like annoying habits I have that are annoying to her, and she's like, but those are the things like that she knows it's me, like when I woke up, like and so I don't know, whatever I do, chewing or something, and she's annoyed. I'm like, you missed it.
It's so good. Okay,
So what was that? What was that like waking up from that experience?
do you remember?
Were you
Do you remember
disoriented?
dying?
Yeah, I mean, what do you remember? What was it like waking up, and how did you learn what happened to you? How did that all go?
Yeah, that was a crazy experience. My wife and I, coming off those coma drugs is like really intense.
Yeah.
And so there was like a whole day, the first day coming off of them, that we refer to as 50 First Dates, if you've seen that movie. And so I would wake up and Amanda would be there and like a nurse would be there. Something I was like in the ICU, and they're like, do you know where you are? What happened? They tell me like your heart stopped. You actually died for a few minutes and we had to do all this. And like, it's so weird. I don't know how else to explain. It's so weird losing time. Like you wake up and it's like 3-4 days later. Like I was just weeping. And when they told me that, I'd just be weeping and just be like to my wife, that must have been so hard for you to wait and just not know. But then I'm on these coma drugs and so I'd fall asleep, I'd doze off, and then I'd forget. And I'd wake up
And then have the same conversation
all
again.
over again. And yeah, it happened, no joke, probably like 50 times. And my wife, a few times, she was like, someone else has to tap in. Like, I can't do this again right now. So I remember this, but I remember it as one conversation, like not happening multiple
Amazing.
times. And so, but really, I mean, physically, I was fine. And so honestly, I was doing CrossFit pretty soon, like maybe 2 weeks after. And the real work was the emotional work afterwards. And I mean, it took years.
So
Yeah.
first piece is how do you? There's no heart damage. Do they figure out what's going on? Because you and I initiated this conversation because I registered that you had some unique, I don't want to say implant cyborg technology in you, right? I was like, hey, what is that? Right? We were in the sauna, and that was kind of the first time you brought up, or when we were paddling, and you had an AED implanted in your body.
Yeah. They don't know what caused it. We've done genetic testing. We've done every test under the sun. We don't fully know what causes it. And so they put AED, defibrillator in me on the outside of my rib cage, just because I was so young when it happened. They have smaller ones, but they have to go through an artery if they do that one that's like up here by the chest. And so because I was so young, they didn't want to do that and burn an artery that they might want to use later. And so I have that on there in case it ever happens again. It'll shock me. It has happened once after another CrossFit workout. So I stay away from the max heart rate workouts now, and I haven't had any problems.
And tell us a little bit about what that means. So you have it happen, which means did you go into cardiac arrest and then you were like, did you just get zapped in the moment and then you're fine? Like what happens there?
Pretty
What
much.
does that mean?
Pretty much. Yeah. So I have what's called a VFib arrest. And so my heart will go like into VFib, which is like over your max. My heart goes to like 140, something like that. It's basically just fluttering. It's barely even beating. It's just quivering. And then it'll arrest. So
240.
Yeah. 240. Is that what I said? Or did I say 3? Whatever it
I think
is.
you said 140, but 240.
Yeah, 240. Yeah. 240. And so, but it'll catch that before it stops and it'll zap me. And so I was done with my workout and I was actually cheering on someone else. And then I felt like a vibration on my side. I'm like, oh, I didn't know that device vibrated. And then I just had this flood of like, oh my gosh. And then it just like, boom, zapped me, which doesn't feel great when you're conscious, but right afterwards, honestly, you feel like $1 million afterwards. I'm like,
And you don't like lose consciousness or anything. You just feel yourself get zapped and have this like weird physical experience. And then you're like, and I'm back.
Pretty much. I mean, it's a big zap. Like it tossed me to the ground. And then you're like, oh, I feel like I could get up and work out again. You know, you feel incredible afterwards, but it feels like a horse kicked you in the chest.
Okay, so let me ask you sort of go down this, you have to go in this pathway of, okay, human beings and our bodies do weird stuff, right? And it's very strange. And maybe there's not even a history in your family of this. You're the first one. Is there a diet component? Was there a stress component? Is it just, I mean, you know what I mean? Like you must have, like, you're like, okay, I have to stop drinking Four Loko and I can't do meth before I work out.
Yeah.
Like, you know what I mean? Like where did you draw any lines in sort of behaviors for yourself?
Not really. I mean, they did find a lot of plaque. So, I mean, I think stress and diet and poor genetics were for sure a part of that, but I didn't have a heart attack. So a little different, you know? So, that's what kind of just kicked off my journey of getting into the health and wellness space and where we connected, you know, breathwork, sauna, because after that I was like, whoa, that's like a rude awakening in your early 30s. I felt like I was being pretty healthy. And I'm like, there's some pieces missing to this puzzle that I want to address because I want to live long, happy, and healthy.
One quick side question. Did your doctors think you were insane for going back to CrossFit 2 weeks after being in a coma, after having a cardiac arrest at CrossFit?
My cardiologist okayed it. He said it was fine and they felt comfortable with the AED in me. The nurses were freaking out in my PT there. I was grabbing the 50-pound dumbbells that I'm pretty sure had never been touched because everyone in there was, you know, over 70. So
I'm sure. Okay. Now I just want to circle back to something you said. You said that the physical part of it was pretty easy to sort of manage right around. And I think that's where most of us would go tactical first. I can change this diet. I can change this nutrition. I can look at my heart rate. Like those are things. But you said it took a long time to talk about the emotional piece of that. Will you talk a little bit more about that?
totally. I mean, that's really where the work began. Physical therapy was easy and I snapped right back, but it was really the emotional growth component. I mean, I don't remember any of it, you know? And so like I woke up, I felt great physically, and it's a trauma, you know, and trauma brings out, you know, a lot of insecurities. And so for me, it was like, life is short and we have to make the most of it. So I was like, slam that pedal to the ground. Whereas my wife, she lived through these days of not knowing what was going to happen. Was I going to be brain damaged? It was very emotionally traumatic for her. And we just had such different emotional experiences of the same thing. It was really hard for us to find each other, and we almost didn't make it. We talked about divorce at some points, and it was years of therapy and conferences and seminars that I was really able to find myself and my own fears and insecurities, and we were able to find each other again.
And you said you obviously were doing CrossFit and felt like you were leading a pretty healthy life, but that there were these missing pieces of the puzzle. And how did you go about discovering what those might be and what worked? And I know it sounds like you took a lot of seminars and courses, both from a mental health perspective, but also a physical health. I mean, was it just a bit of a fishing expedition? Like, I know I'm missing some things, so I'm going to try new things. Where did you even begin? Because I think this would be really valuable. I think a lot of people go through traumatic physical experiences, but don't even know where to begin to start seeking how they might change up the way they're doing
Yeah, and if you're
things.
listening to this, just so everyone knows, I mean, you don't have to have gone through something this traumatic with Nolan, but it could be cancer.
Yeah.
It could be an illness in your family. It could be you lose your ability to compete or occupy a role in society. That loss or death, petite death, could be the same thing. So just I think this is really interesting.
Totally. Yeah, I'm sorry. What was the question in there?
Yeah.
Where do you
Well,
start?
yeah. Where did
How
you
did you know?
start? Yeah. I mean, I think you said that you knew
Oh,
that
yeah.
you were missing some key pieces from a health perspective. And how did you figure out what those were and figure out what was going to work for you?
Yeah, I think by happenstance, like I was training for a triathlon and ran into like the early XPT stuff, which is kind of how we know each other. And Laird and
And
doing.
that's Laird and
Yep.
Gabby's sort of wholeness wellness platform.
Yep. Yeah. So their stuff, they didn't have an app or anything at that time. I was just like following some people on Instagram. This was before ice baths were cool. I made one out of, a chest freezer before it was like a thing. People thought I was weird and crazy. But
You are.
I mean, for me, the breathing, the ice and the sauna, like I bought those things right away and just started implementing it. And I started, feeling better. And for me, we just love having people over at our house and inviting people to do these things with us. It's just more fun that way. And I noticed like profound changes in my life and my friends' lives, like people that were told they'd be depressed and on meds the rest of their life were able to step off and feeling amazing, like, wow, this is just from some YouTubes and following kind of.
And this is from a breath practice and getting hot and getting cold.
That's it.
Those three things.
Yeah. Just that's where it
In
started.
community.
In community. Yeah. That's a good add addition at the end there. And so for me, it was just a hobby. And then I'm like, wow, this stuff's amazing. I'd love to just get certified just to learn more. And I went through the first certification, which was the XPT one. Gosh, that was like years ago now.
A million years ago.
Yeah. And I know that since then you've gotten many other breathwork certifications and are now teaching that as part of your own platform. But what was it about the breathwork in particular that you felt was effective for you? And then what is your own breathwork practice like?
It's just amazing what it can do. Yeah. And it's for very little time investment as far as managing stress, managing emotions. And like, even like when my wife and I are in a heated argument, and she's a psychologist and she incorporates a lot of this stuff into her work too. And we do a lot of collaborative work. But when we're a heated argument and both seeing red and, it's hard for us to hear each other, we will stop and we will hug each other and take like 3 to 5 really deep, slow breaths together, like where we can feel each other's stomachs hitting ours. And it just regulates our nervous system. We can think clearer now and not be so emotionally reactive and have a productive conversation.
I'm writing this down.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's like marriage hack 101 right here is like, have a nice hug and then 3 to 5 big deep breaths and then start again.
Well, even
You know,
without the hug, just the breaths, I mean, think about how your breathing is when you're in that argument. It's like, "Da, da, 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 da," it's just like this rapid breathing that's not, getting us past that emotional response.
This episode of the Ready State podcast is brought to you by Element.
I want to talk about salt for a second. And I think we've gotten to a place in our specialness and our highly ornamented, bespoke programming where you're forgetting about the basics. You're breathing hard. We see people doing high intensity exercise. They're sauning. It's starting to get warm again. You're probably not eating enough salt. You're probably eating very clean, whatever that means. But I guarantee you're not getting enough salt. And when you feel crappy, I bet you don't have enough salt on your
Yeah, and
board.
one of the things that you and I like to do is drink coffee at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And we've really trained ourselves out of that habit because often we find if we just hydrate and drink some Element at that time of the day, that's actually what our body needs.
Yeah,
that our
sure.
body doesn't need more caffeine or whatever else we would want to drink at 4 o'clock in the afternoon.
And let me be honest,
does need a little bump.
Water is really boring.
It's really boring.
And I want I
You
don't know
want
if
to be entertained in your
dude,
mouth. I know.
you know me. And I feel like I get to be entertained. An ice cold Element with essential salts. And what ends up happening is oftentimes when I put that salt on board, I'm like, oh, I actually can go harder. I was just sort of electrolyte limited.
Yeah, you can perform better at work or in your workouts.
Do you remember back when we owned the gym, it would be hot in the parking lot, and I would actually keep a stack of like electrolyte tabs, and people would come in and they'd be sucking on deadlift, and I'd be like, here, put this in your mouth. And they're like whole, like just straight up salt. And then they would end up crushing it. And it's because the brain needs salt to go.
Yeah, especially if you're working hard and as the summer comes.
Yeah, I bet
hot.
you're not salting your food enough. So look, we literally drink it every day.
It's true.
Right now, if you order Drink Mix through our link, you get a free sample pack with all of Element's flavors. Go to drinklmnt.com/TRS.
This episode of the Ready State podcast is brought to you by Momentous.
Look, we have a lot of friends who say, what should I take? What's the basis?
Yeah, there's a lot of supplements and things to choose from.
There's a lot of wonky stuff,
Yeah.
right? And one of the things we say is, let's cover the basics. What's foundation?
Yes, start with the basics and then add.
Are
from
you
there.
getting enough protein? Yes or no, 1 or 0. And chances are some of our friends are ninjas and some of them are really under protein. And they're
Way
like,
far
they're
behind.
older.
I mean, we recommend 1 gram per pound of body weight.
or
which
even
is,
ideal body weight, which,
Yeah.
puts you at 0.7, 0.8. But the bottom line is people are like, oh, I ate quinoa 2 days ago. And we're like, whoa, nope, that's not good enough. Second, got to get some creatine. That turns out to be so cheap and like a miracle substance.
It is. It has like 1,000 positive benefits and is the most studied supplement on earth and proven to be safe for a variety of people.
So do I look like a genius because I started taking creatine in high school, or am I just lucky?
I think you're just lucky because I think we all took it in the 90s and we had no idea why.
Third is that chances are you probably need some omega-3s. If you're not a huge fish eater, getting some omega-3s can really make a difference. And I think we're recognizing around brain health and some of these other issues, making sure omega-3s, and particularly since what we're seeing is people are eating a lot of processed foods which have a lot of soy and omega-6s, you need the omega-3s. Those 3 things are such a powerful way to get started on just boosting your nutrition when you can't be perfect.
Yeah, and I think our message is always just stay with the basics, and then once you've made a habit of sticking with the basics, then think about adding in some other things. But these would be the things you and I would both start with, no matter what.
And it's de rigueur across all our whole family members.
Yeah, de rigueur.
De rigueur. So go to livemomentous.com/TRS and use code TRS for 20% off your first purchase of our foundations. Iyengar said, nerves are king of the breath is king of the brain. We, with this team that I'm working with at this local university, when the quarters come or timeouts, athletes come over, and before anyone talks or anything, they just take a few breaths just to regulate, get out of that fight or flight. They've just been battling, and you can see everyone calms down, and then the conversations are very different just after that reset. And then we also use some breath work. We do a couple rounds of really simple breath work to initiate our warm-up practice, because it just centers everyone. Everyone is together. We're within close. We're having this kind of group experience. And it's like a transitional period where we've gone from like kind of being goofy and funny, and now we're transitioning into getting ready for this thing. And it's really simple to integrate, even with like people you don't think it's going to be traditionally, useful for.
Totally. Yeah, I mean, it's so powerful and so simple. I notice, I mean, my performance changed. Like I could perform better just by simply being mindful of how I'm breathing during it. I slept better. And I was like, wow, for very minimal investment, you get a
I
pretty
like
big
that.
payoff for this thing. So, um, even the professional athletes I work with, I'm like, the biggest thing you can do that's going to have the biggest impact is you changing how you breathe every day and not worried about how you breathe during your
In
performance.
another small world, everyone, um, Nolan's like, hey, I think I know your college roommate. So my freshman year, I think you have Scott's brother who comes and hangs out.
Yeah, Owen. Yeah.
It's crazy that the brother of my roommate at Boulder, my freshman year, is down
working
there,
with
and we
you.
reconnected through you again. So you've just made another connection. But I just want to point out, I can't shake you. Like, you are us.
Yeah, that was funny when that came up. I'm like, I hung out with this guy, and he's like, Kelly Starrett. It was Joel that told me that, and he's like, he was like the little brother. He's like, I remember being around them with my brother, and they were so cool.
Scott was cool. I
Yeah.
don't think I was ever cool.
You had hair and everything,
Oh,
baby.
no, Scott had this long hair, and he played the guitar,
long
and he
hair
was
then.
so cool.
Oh my God. Okay. So tell us about how or what prompted you, because it sounds like you go through this traumatizing experience and then find all these tools to help, your marriage and your life and your physical health, individually. But what prompted you then to say, hey, actually, I'd like to do this professionally, and tell us what it is you're doing now?
Yeah. So the nice prompt and kick in the pants was COVID, because as a professional magician, most gigs got all canceled during that time. And I had a lot of friends that in the magic world that um, they made the transition to Zoom magic. That just didn't seem fun to me at all.
No.
So I was like,
No.
my friends did really well financially, but I'm like, that just doesn't look enjoyable. So I was like, I wonder if we could turn this health stuff into a business. So I built a sauna on a trailer, and I was like, let's do this. And so for the last 5 years or so, I've been doing essentially performance coaching, doing breathwork, sauna, ice bath, mindset, sleep performance, stuff like that, doing retreats, private training, working with teams, all sorts of stuff, executives. And then now, like this last year, I've had a couple profound things happen. One, I went through a somatic breathwork certification that just blew my mind as a personal experience and like the power of it. And so
Explain what that is for everyone.
Soma just translates to body in Greek. And so somatic breathing is really about connecting your mind and body and tapping into your body's intelligence. A lot of our work we do is very intellectual, but it's like bridging the gap to our body's intelligence and also resetting our nervous system. So that happened. And then between that and hearing this podcast of this, she's a PhD in kinesiology and rehab, and she was just talking about her research in um, negative emotional states prior to an athlete's performance made them more susceptible to injury. And
You're saying being angry and fired up on the dark side may not be the gateway
to
towards
peak performance.
Yeah.
I mean, angry, depressed, you have a breakup, whatever that is, something, family health incident, you have all these different things. And so to me, I started connecting some dots. There's like this other side to mindset. I think mindsets is so important. And there's a lot of research that supports that. And I'm like, what about like all these other athletes that had the mindset, but they didn't end up on top? And what about like I talk about a friend, that's also a DPT, and I don't know if there's a general stat you can comment, Kelly, but he's like 90% of my patients don't adhere to the protocols that I give them. Is that pretty? Is that
It's
Oh,
actually?
yeah.
it's the dirtiest secret in physical therapy. If
I'm
I
like,
said, "Hey, you need to take this pill every day," people take it one every like 10 days.
oh
Yeah.
my gosh. I mean, I
And
was
then we
like,
ask you, and it really like you come back in and you're like, "Did you take the pill? Did you do your exercises?" It's like a joke.
Yeah.
No,
is
I
that
didn't.
like is that like when the dentist asks you if you've been flossing?
You're like, yeah,
Yeah.
sure, I floss. It's fine. It's all I floss.
Yeah, but the only time it drives Kelly temporarily insane is when people are like, "Hey, yeah, I mean, I did what you told me and it didn't work." And Kelly's like, "Well, what did you actually do?" And they're like, "Well, I did one thing of the 20 things you told me to do." And he's
Yeah.
like, "Well, then you didn't do what I told you."
Well, and I want to hear what you're saying, but one of the things that Juliet and I continue to figure out or appreciate is that we've really siloed our health. Here's my strength and conditioning. Here's my nutrition. Here's my breath work. Here's my sleep. And it feels like these buckets. And what we don't sort of recognize is how all of these components are deeply connected, tightly conjoined, and sort of very interrelated. And what I wonder is as you're working with people and you've discovered this sort of emotional piece or this emotional behavioral safety cognitive piece, which one of those things do you think is the biggest lever, or do you have to touch them all? You know what I mean? Because it seems like I just think about we're watching right now. We have friends who are competing in the World Cup in mountain biking, and it's so hard for these athletes to be on top week after week. And we see crazy things happen in their lives and breakups, and sometimes they're super hot, and we don't know why. It's really hard to sort yourself out and be competitive. I mean, we saw this documentary about this free diver in the Bahamas, and he said that when he gets into a fight or an argument with his girlfriend, he can't hold his breath as long.
Totally.
And I was like, wow, that's so sensitive, right? That if he's in love with his family, he's having a great time, he dives great. And if he has any tension in his relationships, boom, it shows up in his ability to hold his breath. So that's got to be the same thing you're talking about here.
Well, yeah. I mean, simple answer to your question is yes. um, so like your experience in, people not adhering, like I was doing all this performance coaching, seeing people have these life-changing experiences. Like I mentioned, off depression meds, feeling amazing. 6 months later, they go back to popping the pills and stopping the practice. I'm like, fascinating. And then I have a background as an emotional coach, and people would have these profound insights, growth, like new belief patterns, all sorts of stuff. And then, 6 months later, they're back in the same thought patterns and back in that crappy relationship. And I'm like, what's going on? And for so long, I chalked it up to as, oh, well, like not everyone has that grit or is willing to put in that hard work. And going through the somatic stuff and connecting some of the dots, I'm like, this stuff all works together. And so if you think about like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Physiological, then safety, belonging, love, esteem, and self actualization. To me, a lot of people actually just don't feel safe emotionally.
Well, I know that I don't feel safe talking about my feelings.
Hey, it's true. You don't.
And I just want to point out that if you can just kill me and I can come back changed, I'm into that. I just go asleep for a few days, get cold, come back. I'm like, I'm different, and you can do all the hard work. I just think that you've established
what
this
you're
really
talking about.
difficult way around the barn, but it's really difficult to create practices
Yeah.
in your daily life where you get to touch base with how you feel given what's going on.
I mean, the emotional work is harder than any of the physical work. I don't know if that's just a more, masculine wired thing or what, but like, honestly, when I do it, like I need calories, your brain burns fat, and I'm just like, I'm zonked. Like I can't even more than a hard workout. And so, to me, it's like people don't feel safe. And if you don't feel safe, if your nervous system doesn't feel safe, it's really, really hard to take in new information. And so when you're trying to put that positive statement or mindset on top of it as a Band-Aid, it's really, really hard for your nervous system to actually accept that when it doesn't feel safe. So we're like skipping steps in the hierarchy of needs. We're skipping safety and going to like self-actualization, and if you don't even feel fully emotionally safe, like, and you're skipping to belonging and love and your relationships, like how how is the quality of those relationships if you don't actually fully feel safe?
Tell me how you work with a client when you discover that, maybe the root cause is not feeling safe. How do you help them? How do you support them? How do you get them
Yeah.
into a place of feeling safe so that they can move on to belonging and actualization and all those other things?
Yeah, so I mean, I hear this from a lot of athletes and executives, a common theme. They'll actually use the words, "I don't feel safe." It feels like someone's chasing after me, like, and I always have to be running. And so, my modality is mind, body, and spirit. Integrating mind, body, and spirit makes you fully present to your life, and there you can achieve your goals and have enjoyment in life.
Do
And
you think it have to be hyper meta about it and very aware and have to have all these conversations, or are there ways where I can be doing these things in small daily practices that lead me to the same thing? Because I just think, what I like is I like to have 10 bottom lines. And if you just do the thing, a lot of the things are going to, if you get cold, if you do the breath work, if you know, make time with your partners to just, connect, disconnect and connect. Is that enough, or do I have to actually go through some formal sort of
Yeah,
exercise to get
coaching or
there?
support.
Or could I get there through meaningful small behavior practice?
and the answer is also yes. um, I mean, the breath work, like we said, is so powerful and will have move the dial on a lot of these things. And it's really connected to all those areas, you know? And so I think oftentimes we do all this mental, type work. We're a very heady culture, but
Mhm.
we're disconnected from our body's intelligence. I think you think about athletes in particular, in a lot of ways, they've divorced themselves from their physical bodies. Like their body might be crying out for rest and recovery, and the culture is to just go harder, right? Tough it up, work harder, and so for me, like a lot of anxiety in athletes, to me is like, what if anxiety isn't something to be solved or a problem, but it's your body trying to alert you to something?
Oh, almost like pain is a
Pain's a
request
request
for
for
change.
change. Yeah.
Your anxiety
Yeah.
is a
Anxiety is
check
a request.
engine light.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Yep.
so, I mean, you think about when you're working on a patient, Kelly, or like if you have a massage, you're like, "Whoa, that's way tighter than I thought." I mean, the same thing for our body and our emotions and nervous system. Like, there's an unawareness to where emotions are stored in our body, and if you've read The Body Keeps the Score, it's just like,
Amazing
yeah,
book.
it's in there, and in the neuroscience research is showing that, we've all really had trauma of some sort. Even like minor neglects as a child shows up the same as major trauma that like someone else has experienced in a brain scan. And so, the work that I do, a lot of it centers around breath. And when I say spirit, I just mean that in the most general terms, not specifically religious. Community, connection to self, and contribution. That's how I describe the spirit work that I do. And so, yeah, we do the body stuff, the breath work, sauna, ice bath stuff is what I do. Just balance or incorporating rest and play into your life. Play is not something that you need to earn. It's actually a vital part of making this life better and your work.
Yeah, Juliet,
Yeah.
I'm going skiing.
Yeah.
I'm just kidding.
No, we've talked a lot about that play piece too, Nolan, and think it's so critical and something that we often forget as adults.
We
You
even
know,
it's gone in
yeah.
training.
Yeah,
Like strength training now is so formal and precise, and there's no messing around anymore. Or play.
yeah. Well, even sometimes just taking care of our health. I mean, we've gotten so tactical about, trying to figure out, how many supplements we can take and how we can live forever. But sometimes it just becomes so regimented that the fun and play is taken out. So I could not agree more that the play piece is so important.
Totally. I mean, I love Peter Attia. He says, who cares? Who wants to live longer if you're not happy? Like we can
It's
be
a really
so
good point.
hyper focused on it all. But for me, it's like, how can I bring energy, enjoyment in life? I think the people I work with feel like they've traded fulfillment for success in life, and they become very successful, and yet they remain unfulfilled. And
In
so,
the last ambush, we just recommended a book called Belonging by Owen Eastwood, and he really does talk about this connection, this feeling like you belong, feeling seen, feeling really heard, understanding sort of your roots and lineage. and creating simple routines or rituals around that as a competitive advantage. And he's using a lot of high level sport as his example, is that when you don't have those things, you can have all the tactical trappings. It looks like success, but it's not sustainable. It doesn't work. And people really do feel disconnected versus sort of what is the secret to high performing groups of people. And it's what you're saying, it's play and belonging and vulnerability. And it's really interesting to just have read that and be at top of mind, especially working with this team going to this championship time, and really hearing what you're saying is that how do we take those lessons and actually apply them to our families and to our kids, and that we feel seen and connected and safe.
Totally. I mean, so that leads us to the last part of my modality is, I mean, like you mentioned, like you have a breakup, you have a distressful whatever happened in your life, because life happens, car accident, and that's going to impact your performance that day. Well, like the free
Yeah.
diver you mentioned, you know, and you have no control over those circumstances most times, you know. And so for me, in the mind piece, it's mental, emotional health, mindset, and magic. And so in the mental, emotional space, you know, we work on like just connecting to what you're feeling in general. And and then we get into like stories. What are the stories you tell yourself? And oftentimes, like we adopt a story for our life at a very young age, whatever that may be. Like mine's like I'm not enough, and that can drive us to work our butts off to achieve whatever, you know. And so really, it's about identifying that and just not letting it run on automatic, you know, and driving you, being aware, loving that part of yourself. And you're not, you don't need to get rid of it, shame it, or try and just duct tape a new I am whatever over that. It's like accepting and loving that part of yourself. And so I always ask them, like, go back to the earliest age you thought that belief, and like when was it actually intelligent for you to have adopt that belief? And so
Do you
How
do you get here, Nolan, without dying?
I mean, honestly, right after the breath
Or
work,
do we just have to have one friend who's died?
yeah, if you have a friend, it helps. I mean, really, it's just all fear and anxiety is sort of connect. I have a friend that's a death doula, and she talks about how all fear is really connected to a fear of death. And so, you know, when I work with people, it's connecting to that limiting story and accepting and loving and having grace for that younger version of yourself that adopted that belief that we never thought to question as adults.
How do you help people figure out what that limiting belief is, or that story that we've told ourselves? How do you how do you bring that out in people and help them identify it?
A lot of people will, a lot of high performers know right off the bat. Like people that perfectionists, like the hard workers, they know the voice has a sound in their brain, like it's very distinct. If they don't know, like the breath, like practice connects you to your body. We start with emotions, and then we just start asking questions and teasing it out. Like, what's the
You know, with our breath work we do with some of our athletes, it brings up a lot of insecurity. It makes them feel real anxious. And I've actually gone to the place where, because I'm always like, if you pin me down on this breath work, I'm like, oh, that's what we're doing for your back. It's about mechanics. It's decongestion, right? It's just the first movement of the body. And I'm like, and you might be angry with your mother or your father when you're freaked out when you do this, but I'm like, that's not the part I'm interested in. But now I have to say that I really do tell people when I'm doing this may bring things up for you, and that's okay, right? But I just need you to not be knocked back when this really simple practice, hits you a little bit deeper. And we have seen it transform the lives of some of our athletes, because when they would get anxious, their breath would get out of control, and then their minds knew exactly what that was. Oh, we're breathing out of control. CO2 is low. Let's go into anxiety and shut down. And now we're seeing athletes be able to really control that experience and feel better in their bodies, and have this really powerful lever that they can pull when it starts to feel like they're slipping a little bit. It's amazing.
That is really amazing. I mean, so with like the teams you work with, have you seen patients like with overuse injuries without like a clear mechanism of injury.
No, there's always a thing. And sometimes that thing is you didn't eat enough calories, you didn't sleep enough, you're stressed. Really, what we don't see is hey, I see that your times are coming down and down, and you're living this perfect. You're controlling what can be controlled, and you're just working too hard. We don't see that at all. It's always, even with a team that I'm working with, there was some pushback around some of the athletes that they felt really tired, and I said, hey, I don't think you're eating enough. And it turns out that was the limiting problem. They just weren't eating enough. And we see that over and over again, that the eating begets better sleep, begets better psychological readiness and feelings, allows you to work harder. Now you're cooking dinner with your family and friend. I mean, just we are a
Cascading.
complex system of systems, I think we like to say around here. And you're absolutely right. It's rare that we see someone just overuse.
Yeah, that's. I was curious what your experience of that. You see way more people than I do, and just kind of some of the work I do with my friend over here. That's a DPT. I mean, we've run into some cases where, like, yeah, there wasn't a clear mechanism with some of the athletes going through the combine and some different things. And as we did some of this mental, emotional work, like muscles started to loosen up for like,
Oh, yeah.
and so the body stores that stuff. And so I use, we connect to those limiting stories we have. We're just story human beings, right? We just always telling ourselves story. And that's the thing, is we have power and advocacy to actually choose a new story. But that starts with accepting and loving that part of ourself that came up with that original story. And it's probably never going away. But we don't have to let it drive the bus anymore. And then that's where I insert some moments of magic, like you guys experienced.
That's what I was going to ask about. Like, please tell us how because I think it's so cool that you're taking this early profession and passion and figuring out how to inject it into this new thing you're doing in this
Pattern
really
interruption.
cool way.
Yeah.
Yeah. So tell us how
That's
you're
it.
using magic as part of the practice.
That's a perfect term, Kelly. So there's all this interesting neuroscientific research coming out of UC Berkeley on positive awe state, which is just a fancy word for awe and wonder. And so magic creates those, and they're actually using magicians and some of the stuff. And so that gets you off of automatic, and it gets you to actually not see through the lens of your limiting story anymore and take in new information. And so, when you're like, if I were to ask you to look around the room and find everything that's blue, right? How many things can you see that are blue and count them? And then if I were to ask you off the cuff of your head, top of your head, how many things did you see that are red? Right? So you probably weren't aware of that in that short amount of time because you weren't looking for red. Our minds have that confirmation bias and find what they're looking for. And so if you're looking through the lens of I'm not enough, you're going to hear and see everything saying and supporting that belief, even, and you're going to find things that are close to blue and say, oh, that's blue. Like that's actually like light blue or whatever, but it's close enough. You're going to call that blue. So your brain does the same thing with a belief. And so it's really about being aware of that. And then we can use awe and wonder to interrupt that and find a new focus, find a new color.
Who was it? I don't think it was Tommy Wood. Why does the body think that's a good idea? Wasn't that?
Yeah, I think that was Dan.
Was it Dan?
Yeah.
And that question sometimes is something is tight or you can't access something or you're having pain. Like, why does the body think that this is a good strategy in the moment? And I think that's a really sort of approaching these things with curiosity. I think I really love that. Like why well, I have this story. Why do I think that's a good idea to have that? It's a nice way of kind of working back to the root.
Yeah. And I can say, having experienced the awe and wonder of your magic show firsthand, it really makes sense to me that you can use it, literally as like a modality in working with people. Do you have any more info about what they're learning in the research from Berkeley? What is the mechanism of this? Is it just that it's taking a pause from your, ruminating brain? And, is it just the awe in and of itself? I mean, what do they, is there more? What are they learning?
I mean, it boosts dopamine. I know
Yeah.
is what they're learning a lot. I think it really has to do with bringing you fully present. Related to a lot of the stuff on flow. I haven't read all of it, and to me, it's like being fully present is just kind of another fancy. Flow is a fancy term for that, and very rarely are in our lives are we fully present to the moment. Right? Where anxiety is typically related to like the future, and worry it's just using our imaginations for worry instead of, you know,
Yeah, I
creating.
mean, wouldn't you say like we were all, every single one of us that were crowded around that table, like we were fully present and fully experienced
I wasn't
awe.
present because I was like, this is going against the laws of nature. I don't know how this is
Some
happening.
people have the
Well,
anger
yeah, I mean,
response.
You pulled
yeah,
out
yeah,
you
yeah.
pulled
I
out a
mean,
coin that was big as my head, and
yeah,
I was like, hey, whoa, 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 whoa.
yeah. It was
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah. No, Nolan, what are you working on now? You're seeing that sometimes we end up with a physical practice that turns into a much larger conversation. And I love that that's sort of some of the places you're going. Let me ask you this. Do you find that it's a hard sell to get people there, or do they get there on their own to kind of talk about what's next?
To like work on like the story and mental
Yeah,
emotional
because
stuff.
it's easy to get cold. It's novel and cool, and you freak out the
Looks
first
good on
time. Right?
Instagram.
Definitely looks good on Instagram.
I think I mean it's a little bit of a sell, but I mean the way I do it, like I do this at retreats or like as keynotes, like I talk about the story work, and that's blended in with a little bit of breath work and some magic, and it's really compelling for people. I think the high performers, executives, and athletes, I mean, they're all experiencing they're overwhelmed, they're anxious, they're tired, and overworked, and while still feeling that, they still feel the pressure that they need to perform and bust their ass and generate results, and so I think people understand that it's not working, and they have the success, and yet enjoyment in life is missing, and so they're willing to do anything at this point. And after one or two sessions of some of the story work and the breath work, people have a pretty profound experience really,
Amazing.
really quickly.
Is there anything in the last like 5 years or since you had your cardiac arrest that you really feel like you've totally changed your mind about?
Oh, that's a good question. I think probably about nutrition and diet. I was super strict plant based for a couple of years based on recommendation from my cardiologist and just reading through the research. I just like to geek out with stuff like that. And then, I just started reading more and doing extensive blood panels. And now I excitingly eat some dairy and red meat and have been trying to boost my protein intake, which was tough to get on a plant based diet. And I use your protein pancake recipe like pretty often. So
Yes.
good. And it tastes good
I,
too.
I got to say, one of our friends just made those pancakes for Arnold Schwarzenegger, made those waffles for Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Nice.
And he was like, these pancakes are amazing. We have it on footage. I don't think we put it out, but just everyone knows these Juliet's protein waffles.
Hearing that in his accent would be like so good.
Oh yeah,
I'm not even gonna do
I'm
it.
gonna send it to you, Nolan. I'm gonna send it to you.
So
Nolan, where can we find you? You're in Southern California. Tell us where.
I am. Yeah, I'm in Orange County. City of Orange is where I reside. I do a lot of work down here, and I travel around and do corporate events and retreats all over.
And tell us where we'd find you.
You get my website has posted, I think, some upcoming retreats and different things. That's powercoachingnow.com because someone else owns Power Coaching. And my Instagram's also Power Coaching Now, and you can find me on there as well.
Thank you so much, Nolan.
And thank you for going through and having this this terrible / crazy experience so that we all might benefit a little bit from what you brought back from the dark side or the other side. I don't know if it's the dark side, but we're grateful that you're still here, my friend.
Oh, thanks. Well, grateful to be here and great to be with you guys.
Thank you for listening to the Ready State Podcast. If you like what you're hearing, check out all our episodes here or at thereadystate.com. And be sure to subscribe and leave a review on iTunes to help others find our show.
Check us out and follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at The Ready State.
Until next time, cheers, everyone.
You've got it.